The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Welcome. This is Story by Story, celebrating the human spirit. I'm Kate Dudding, one of your hosts. Our show happens monthly. We have a guest storyteller who comes and tells about what they do with storytelling. And you can do a lot. You can tell stories, as most of you assume, to children, but you can tell them to adults. You can use them as part of a healing aspect, that anyone who suffered trauma or a bad health condition, it helps in their healing process if they can share their stories. And there are many other applications of storytelling as well. We also share with you upcoming storytelling events. Now, usually my partner host, who is our guest today, will say, well, Kate, what have you done interesting in storytelling this month? So, Joe, I'll answer your almost question. I spoke with Margaret French. We did 2 sets at First Night Saratoga, the celebration on New Year's Eve. Our topic was the kindness of strangers. Our first set was at 6, and we had about 15 people. Our second set had an overflow. We had standing room only, and even that was a little dicey. That was, I believe, because in the same building down the hallway, in a very large room, there was Comedy Works, and I think we got the overflow from their 8 o'clock set. So some people left after a story or two, but we still ended up with about 30 or so people. And I think we introduced some of the overflow from Comedy Works to stories that had humor in them, but showed that the kindness of strangers is everywhere. So I think it's time to introduce my host, because this is really weird for me just to be talking all by myself here. And today we have Alden Doolittle, also known as Joe, who's usually right here. And welcome, Joe.
Well, now I'm over here.
But now you're over
I'm over here in the guest seat, and we talked about, we do talk in some strategic way about who's going to be on the program, because we like to have a mix of people and ideas. And Kate suggested that I be the guest, so I'm going to be the guest and talk a little bit about how I use stories and how I acquire stories. And most of the time it's going to be about some of the things I do as a volunteer chaplain at Albany Medical Center.
So how did you, I know your day job,
Yeah.
the job that you were in jobs you were in for a long time, involved the medical field and administration, is that
Right, I'm a recovering HMO administrator. That's the way I usually describe it.
Okay.
And in the mid-90s, I left the operational side of it and was going to consult and look for something else. I was in my mid-50s maybe, and I'd always thought about doing ministry and never really felt a strong call. But the idea of becoming a chaplain, because I'd schmoozed a lot in my job.
Okay. In a hospital setting.
In a hospital and healthcare setting. So, and I had a good friend, Harlan Ratmeyer, who I tell stories with, who was the chaplain at Albany Med and runs a training program in chaplaincy called Clinical Pastoral Education. So is
that like a graduate school, or?
Well, CPE is a 6-hour graduate level course that can apply toward a Master's in Divinity. And I had actually started a part-time Master's of Divinity as well, and this was part of that experience. And CPE runs for an academic year, and you have 1 day of lecture and feedback, and the feedback is on the visits that you make twice a month when you're on call. You're actually the chaplain in the hospital overnight. And that's formatted a lot like programs for psychology or social worker. They do what we do verbatims, which is actually the script of an interview or of a contact you've had with a patient. And then you reflect on that, and your peers kind of reflect on it. And that's how you kind of gather the skills to become a chaplain.
So, as part of your training process, you tape your interaction with patients,
Right.
and then
No, actually, just from your notes and recollection,
Oh.
you do the dialogue and things. Don't tape them.
Okay.
But we certainly remember them, and you know, when you're on call, you're kind of taking whatever's there. There's usually a list of people who've requested a visit, and then things happen at Albany Med. You know, trauma, accidents happen, taking patients off of ventilators happen. And the interesting thing about I was a storyteller of sorts while that was happening. But one of the difficulties I had was praying with strangers. Prayers tend to be, even when you're saying a prayer in church with a congregation around you, you're kind of saying it, you know, it's almost anonymous. You're talking to God and you're not really cognizant. But when you're with the person that you're praying for, like a patient in a bed or a family member who's sick, that's pretty personal. And you walk into a hospital room and you don't know these people. So I had a hard time going to the prayer side of things, and I realized that I had to engage things more. So I would seek with a couple of questions about, you usually do, well, where are you from, that kind of thing. And I began to find things like, well, do you ever hang out with guys or girls you went to school with? And that's what I call kind of a tracer question, because the person has to go back in time and bring you current, if that one works. Probably the most generative question is, how did you meet your spouse? How did you meet the person you love? And sometimes the person who they love is in a coma in the bed.
Okay.
And invariably, for a stranger to ask that question, and maybe it's because you're a chaplain, it works. And people begin to they let their guard down, and it's a very intimate exchange. For example, I met my wife, Gay, who I've been married to for 52 years, when I was 11 at church camp. And our parents used to park us at this Methodist church camp up in the Adirondacks during the Women's Retreat Week. So we met each other, even though we didn't live near each other, for a week every summer. And the phone calls became local between Schenectady and Albany, where Gay lived. So I could talk to her on the phone, and then I figured out I could take a after-school bus from Colonie High to Albany City Line, and I could walk the 4 blocks to her house. I mean, this was romance at its best. So that's
It could be a TV series.
It could be a TV series, but it's a pretty good story, and so this is a very poignant story. I'm going to talk a little bit about this engagement process through a story, if that's okay.
So you just happened upon this?
Well,
or was this part of a discussion?
It was
in
part
the
of
class?
a discussion because the discussion actually came up around me confessing that I was awkward about praying with people I didn't know.
Okay, because I come in the Catholic tradition, and we got some prayers. There's that you can.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Right. So I mean, but you're talking about praying extemporaneously.
Well, sometimes it appears that way, but particularly if somebody's sick, and this is an ecumenical ministry. So,
Right.
You're kind of dealing with people who are Jewish, and you can't use the Jesus thing, and people who might be Buddhist or Muslim, and often there's an ethnic break, too. So it's a wonderful experience to do this engagement because, and I've been doing it for 20 years. So, but go ahead.
So no. So I had interrupted you. So you said you wanted to tell more about this via a story.
Right.
Oh, a story about storytelling. Ooh, that's.
Well, this story is about an answer to the question about how did you meet, and. One Sunday morning after church, I have a friend who at the time was working in the hematology oncology unit at Albany Med. And I'm having my post-worship coffee and chatting, and she comes up and she says, "Are you on call anytime soon?" And I said, "Well, geez, I'm on call tonight." And she says, "Oh, good. I have a patient who just got admitted and diagnosed with leukemia, and he's a young Albany police officer. And, he's not doing well with it. He's angry, and, he could use a visit." I said, "Oh, really? Well, is he up on the 5th floor?" "Yeah, he's in 5, So I think to myself, young policeman, angry, leukemia, oy vey. So I actually got to the hospital, and I had the note in my pocket, and I fortunately got called to the emergency department. I got called someplace else, and it was 8 o'clock, and I hadn't gotten up to the 5th floor, and I took a deep breath, and I said, "Oh, I gotta go up and see that young guy." So I get up there, and they direct me, and he's on reverse isolation, so you gotta put a gown on and all that stuff. And I knock on the door, and I open the door, and there's this beautiful young couple, sandy colored hair on the guy, blonde hair guy, and they're sitting in bed together, sitting up with the pillows pumped up. And they said yes, and I introduced myself, and I talked about my friend, and I said, "Is it okay if I just have a visit?" and whatever. And I heard he was angry, so I said, "How you doing?" He says, "I'm doing fine. I said, "Oh," and then it got awkward because I kind of, here I am, a stranger. They were actually probably trying to cope with the reality of everything. And I think to myself, I said, "Gee, this is a personal question, but how did you guys meet?" And he says to me, "Well, we met on Route 7. I said, "Excuse me, so you mean like at a bar?" Or he said, No, we met on Route 7. Before I was a cop, I used to work at Emory Air Freight, and I used to come along, and I have to take a left turn or a right turn at the light by the Keeler place, where they sell the fancy cars. And there she'd be." I said, what there she'd be where? Well, she'd be in her Honda, her white Honda, over on the other side going towards Schenectady. And I'd have to wait for the light, and, I looked at her. She looked pretty good. And then, that Stewart station is just down the road? One morning, I'm gassing up, and in she comes, and I get a good look at her. And, she's a pretty good looker. I said, "Yes, she is. Yes." So let me get this straight. You've kind of ogled her in the parking lot of the Stewart's. Well, it wasn't really that bad. No, I did notice him. I did notice him in his truck. I said, "Oh, you did notice him?" But I just broken up, and I wasn't. He looked interesting, but I just went and got my coffee and went on my way to work. So, is there a third step? He says, "Yeah, you know that big brick church just down the road from Stewart's on the other side of the street?" I said, "Yes." Well, I got there early, and I came in, and I parked my truck in the parking lot, and I waited for her to go by. It's early in the morning. There's not a lot of traffic. I said, "So you're stalking her?" "Well, not exactly stalking her, but I followed her, and I found out she worked at Bellevue Hospital." "Oh, that was interesting." She said, "I'm a lab technologist at Albany, at Bellevue Hospital." "Oh. Is there a fourth step?" He says, "Oh, yeah, there is. He did the nicest thing. Well, what did he do?" "Well, he went over and he bought a beautiful card, and it was Monet's Water Lilies, and he went over and he put it on my driver's side, and it was raining, so he actually put it in a Ziploc bag." And I came out from work, and there was this note, and I thought it was from my old boyfriend. I was going to just throw it away, but I opened it up, and and it said, "Hi, I'm the guy that you've seen at the Stewart's, driving the red truck at the Keeler light. If you'd like to have coffee, give me a call." And I put my phone number down. Wow. So, well, I'm in the National Guard on the reserves, so I'm off at least once a month. I'm on duty for a weekend, and I did this just before I was going off to the reserves. So I got home and I was waiting for a message, and all I got was clicks on my answering phone. So I knew she'd called, but she hadn't. So that night I got home from work, I got a cup of coffee, and I just sat waiting by the phone, and I let it ring 3 times and picked it up. So what was that like? And she says, "Oh, that was beautiful. We just talked. We talked, and we finally had a we finally agreed to meet." Oh, so first date was at the Macaroni Grill over on Wolf Road. We sat there and we had a nice dinner, and we had a picture of margaritas, and you know, with the conversation we'd had on the phone just kind of continued, and we've been in that conversation ever since. Wow. That's a great story. But tell me something. How did you introduce each other to your parents? I mean, I'm a parent, and you know, how does that work? That you picked up this guy in a truck at Stewart's? You know, I mean, how does? Well, my parents just loved me. They just the minute they met him, and they loved the story, and they thought it was cute, and they liked the Ziploc bag. You know? So how about your side? Well, my parents fell in love with her. They did. And actually, my father got up from the table in the middle of dinner and pulled me into the kitchen. And he says to me, he says, "Timmy, my boy, I gotta say, this woman is a keeper. You best be really on your toes and make sure that this goes all the way. I'm just advising you." Well, that's pretty strong for a father to say. He says, "Well, I'd already figured that out, so it was only just reinforcing what I already knew." I proposed about 3 weeks later, and we've been married for a year and a half. Wow. Gee. You know, I've heard a lot of stories, but I've never heard one like that. And I believe that stories are really strong. And I believe that your story is kind of so full and enthused and infused with the Holy Spirit, that kind of spirit can carry you through the next couple of months and do it very well and do it very positively. I'm hopeful because I just think that that's all that you need. All that you need, you really have. And he says to me, he says, "Oh, I wish that could be so. I pray that could be so." And I looked at him and I said, "I think we just did." And I said, "Amen."
I've heard it before, and it's just a wonderful story.
And it actually happened almost like that. And I think for me, it's a companion to another part of this ministry as a chaplain, because what really happens when you walk in that room as a stranger is that you're not going to leave there as close friends, but you are going to leave there in some way with a manifestation of a loving contact. You can call that the Holy Spirit. You know, I'm not going to try to evangelize here, but there's a palpable presence in human relationships, and sometimes you're able to actually describe it for the people that are experiencing it because they can't describe it or they can't articulate it. And articulating the presence of the Holy Spirit, I discovered, was what prayer with a patient is all about. And it took me a couple of years before I realized that was going on. And it has strengthened my faith because I am aware of that presence of the Spirit in situations. And some of them are not situations that are necessarily holy at the time, you think, but it's there. And that's what I've learned from. There's a sense of the engagement of things.
It's a wonderful thing you're doing.
Well, it's a blessing to me. I don't have an organization to go schmooze with, and I've been doing it long enough, so I know a lot of people in the hospital, and when I come around, thanks to the CPE program, which puts students out summers and during the academic year, staff know what the chaplains are there for, and you can walk on the floor and kind of say what's going on, and they'll say, "Oh, nothing." I said, "Is that right?" He says, "Well, there's one patient that probably could. You know, here. What do you think? Well, why don't you go down?" And they'll reach out, and that's when the blessing happens, because you kind of stumble into things.
Because their story. Now, I was brought up Catholic, but I really don't follow any faith tradition now. Occasionally, I kind of pray, but it's like, in case anyone's listening, or to whom it may concern, but the way they met was so, they kept on meeting, and I mean, it was meant to be, whatever power you want to call it.
Right.
I mean, they were really meant to, and you reminded them that there was this strong connection that they had, that got them together, and that their families were so supportive, immediately realized that this was to be.
The other storytelling element in the situation is that they knew the story. They had told the story before. They actually passed it back and forth as a tag team while they told it, and so that they were proud of it. And in a way, what I said to them about that spirits thing, they already knew. They were living that connection, and that was really beautiful. And one of the other tragedies, I suppose, is that I don't know what actually happened to that guy. I met him once. He was discharged for part of his treatment and probably came back. And
your paths never crossed.
Never crossed.
I just heard this on the way here. StoryCorps. They have been collecting stories since I think 2007. Of a pair of people come together and talk, and it was about medics, and one from Vietnam and one from Afghanistan, and being reunited with someone they had saved.
Wow.
And one of the medics said, I never knew in Afghanistan. I never knew. I patch them up and off they go.
Right.
And I never knew. Yeah. The one in Vietnam was a medic assigned to a platoon. So he and his platoon he knew everyone in the platoon.
Right.
And so, but he said, the other medics said, yes, I never even knew if they lived, let alone anything else about them. And a nurse, the Lib Liberty, that's an emergency, a MASH unit.
Yes.
Again, she said, usually I never ran into him again. I never knew. So I was thinking, but even if he didn't survive, that story, that memory that you shared with them and that you reinforced with them would have helped them however the medical situation went.
Yeah. It's been a good experience, and I learned a lot about storytelling, and I've harvested a lot of stories, but I don't tell many stories about it. That one's so good you can't not tell it, because they're personal, and they aren't involving directly with me. So, and I don't use the same names or something. But anyway. But I've got some other things we want to cover, but I also want to hear what's going on in the world of storytelling.
Okay. Well, we're only at 23 minutes in, but we can do that now. But just to let you know that how the pacing is going. We have plenty of time. Okay. Well, I first have to mention that First Tuesday Tales and Stuff is canceled until further notice, or what? I'm not quite sure the word. Arthur's is undergoing renovations.
Well, we had a great night at Arthur's last week with Janine Laverty, and we had some wonderful stories from Janine about growing up in Iowa. She told personal stories, and Janine's been a guest of the show, and she usually doesn't tell personal stories, so these are very rich. And we had musicians and poets, some of the writers group, the critique group from downtown and the Stockade. So we decided that we were going to go down the street next month to Arthur's sidekick, the Moon and River Cafe.
Okay.
And it's going to be on Monday, the first Monday, at Arthur's. And then I'm working on some rotations.
Yeah, first Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, because Richard is
Richard-
in both, so
Richard-
you were
Richard
able to make
manages
that
both,
work.
yeah.
Okay, and so you're going to have some guests then,
Yeah.
with some topic.
Yeah. And I haven't. So if you want to show up in the Stockade on the first Monday of the month at the Moon and River.
And now you will be seeing a slide that will actually tell you the date, but we don't have a calendar with us. But our producer Greg Brzezinski will take care of all this.
So that's what's going on at Schenectady.
Okay, and stay tuned to see what's happening in March. Yes.
Yes. I have thoughts about maybe doing something in a brewery. Yes.
I often think you could also, if you wanted to you could do a pub tour.
I've thought about doing that actually. It's funny you should bring that up. Stay tuned, as they say.
Yes, but pub tour by a volunteer chaplain.
Yeah.
It'll be a holy
It's all
experience.
spirits. Think about it that way.
spirits.
Okay.
And then the Winter Storytellers series up in Saratoga Springs, sponsored by the Academy for Lifelong Learning, is continuing into February on every Wednesday at noon at 2 Union Avenue, at one of the SUNY Empire State College buildings, right by Congress Park. And on February 6th, Christy Keegan will be there. Her program was called Just Sayin'. On the 13th, Siri Allison will be there. Story Prisms is her topic. And then on February 20th, Kay Olin will be there telling Iroquois stories. And each of these wonderful storytellers have been a guest right here with
Well, and
us.
Kay was with us last month.
Right.
Right.
Well, with you, because
Yeah,
I
right.
came down with it. Now on the 27th, that's a snow date. In case anything, we're still in January taping, so the 27th there might be somebody. You can always call Academy for Lifelong Learning to see if.
And for those of you close enough to get to Saratoga, this is a wonderful opportunity to hear some great tellers, and the audience is a wonderful cross section of the community, and are good listeners. And it's wonderful to listen to good stories with good listeners.
And it's free.
That's even better.
The only downside is there is no parking lot, so you have to find on-the-street parking. But you can handle that, I'm sure. Okay, so here's a series that Joe has set up. Shawnee series, is that what we're calling it now? It's at the Irish American Heritage Museum on Broadway in Albany. And it's a new date and new time, second Sunday of the month at 3 p.m. So on February 20th at 3 p.m., stories that run hot, cold, and green, with Lorraine Harton-Gilardi and Karen Pillsworth.
Who are coming up from Kingston and down in the valley, and they're wonderful, charming, engaging storytellers.
Yes, and they too have been here. They're really wonderful. Lorraine has written a book about wisdom tales, and Karen is the storyteller laureate for Kingston. And they're involved with the interfaith group in Poughkeepsie. And they're just wonderful, wonderful storytellers and ladies. Then, Story Circle of the Capital District, we're essentially a guild of storytellers. Our monthly meetings are for members to tell works in progress. Our next one will be on February 20th at 6:15 at the Pine Hills Branch Library on Western Avenue in Albany. And listeners are very welcomed.
And listeners are very important because you can't really tell a story without a listener. But
you can, but then people think you're a little odd because you're just
Right.
talking to yourself.
Right.
But you can pretend you have a phone. So, no.
And what happens is that it's a great opportunity for you out there who really want to try telling a story, but don't want to do it in front of a audience. And we have people who attend for the first time and tell a beautiful story or learn more about storytelling and come back with folk tales they've begun to explore and things like that.
Or
It's
they
really
hear
fun.
a story and they're reminded of one of their own that they
happens
haven't thought of in a long time. Stories do that.
Yeah.
And you know that from your conversations. Oh, that reminds me of when I blew a tire on, or whatever.
Yeah, so feel welcome.
Okay, and then the next night, on Thursday, February 21st, is the monthly meeting of the Interfaith Story Circle. They will be sharing, the topic that month will be stories of healing and faith. The story Joe just told could well fit into that category. And it's at the Albany Friends Meeting House on Madison Avenue in Albany, 7 to 9 p.m. Free and open to the public.
And that's a nice place to gather for stories because it's a big room that's cozy, and it's an old manse on Madison Avenue with a beautiful bay window that kind of looks out at the traffic of the street. It's fun.
Oh, I was picturing the Unitarians. Wrong group, wrong place
That's
altogether. And I believe, though it isn't here, but as I recall, there will be 2 former addicts who are talking about their healing process. Recovery, yes. Process is like, I do this first and that first. No. Okay, and then on Sunday, February 24th, Story Circle at Proctor's, our series called Word Plays, and it's in our 12th season there, we'll be continuing with the topic of Inside Out.
Like a knot.
Like a knot, or seeing things, that the inside is now out, so it could be...
Or like putting on your socks.
I'm scheduled to tell, and I can't remember what story
There you go. Well, you got a month.
So yeah, I wrote it down. So at my age, I have an offline repository of information. But Siri Allison, Claire Beetlestone, Betty Cassidy, myself, Marnie Gillard, Mary Murphy, Elliot Nieves, who was a medic in
Vietnam, yeah.
and Sandy Schumann are all planning to tell stories that have something to do with Inside Out, or maybe even Upside Down.
Who knows?
Yes. And then our friend Kay Olin will be the featured teller at the Storytelling Open Mic back up in Saratoga Springs at Cafe Lena. That is now meeting the 4th Tuesday of every month at Cafe Lena at 7 o'clock. Doors open at 6:30. They have a full beverage and food service there.
And the renovated space is just great.
Yes.
Just great.
It's like the old lady got a really nice facelift.
There's no wrinkles anymore, I tell you.
No wrinkles, and the sound system is great, and it's set up for live streaming, which they don't do it for the open mic, but they do it for other things. And it's a modest fee. New tellers are always welcome. Showing up at 6:30, you get to sign up to be on the list in the first 7 people, I guess it's about.
Yeah.
No reading, though, just telling. And then this is just a slide to remind you of what our whole season at Proctor's entails. That Inside Out on the 24th is our next to last word plays. So be there or miss out altogether.
Right.
And then finally, we have over 200 stories available on demand on YouTube. Go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on YouTube. Most of them have been gleaned from these storytelling, story-by-story programs. Anything else that I missed that you know
Nope,
of?
that's
Because sometimes you pull something out of your
Yep,
sleeve.
I'm going to be in Florida for a couple weeks, so I just don't have that,
Oh,
I don't have
I'm
my
gonna be
walking
Flo-
around things.
Well, I'm going to be in Florida for 1 week.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just one of the things you got to do.
Oh,
February,
we
go
have to
Florida.
schedule taping in February.
Yeah.
Well, yes, we'll figure something out.
Let me continue on another theme of this chaplain thing, which I think is important. I have sensed since my friend Harlan has taken on this job, that he's been there 20 years and just retired, and he's a consummate storyteller. And he's also a personality in his own right. And the number of chaplains trainees he's had there in 20 years is significant. And what's happened is this ability to be present, to describe the situations spiritually, to describe the impact of the Holy Spirit, has had an effect on the culture of the institution. Now, healthcare,
That great big place.
that
Albany,
great big
Mass.
academic place, and I've always been impressed by the character and competence of the staff. However, the insight of kind of having that spiritual presence and being able to openly talk about it. Harlan doesn't have much access to medical students. This is a digression. But one of the things that happened in 2011, when the class of 2001 returned for their 10th reunion,
Of the medical,
medical
school.
students. And keep in mind that Harlan had a little bit to do with their first year, and at every time that they got together, Harlan gave the invocation, the personal prayer, if you will, at graduation and things. And the pastoral care office was between the hospital and the medical college, so students could stop in, and did, and got counseling that they weren't going to get counseling, but they would come and talk to one of the chaplains. So the administration was really surprised because the class of 2001 said that the person that had the most significant influence on their time at Albany Med was Harlan Rampmeyer. And when they probed it a little bit, they talked about what he said at important times. They talked about his availability in the hall, the ability to stop by and have coffee around the table with the student chaplains or whatever and feel welcome. And several of them quoted from the prayer that he gave at their graduation. And if you don't think you have influence over people's lives by being good, think again, because I think, and you sense that in the rounds, you can approach and you get asked to do things that the staff aren't up to. They're busy doing other stuff. And when somebody's dying or somebody's being taken off that ventilator, there's a lot of things you've got to do medically and nursing-wise. You don't have time to be present for the family. You don't have time to bless the patient. And that's the exchange. And I was conscious of this one day. Early in my rounding, I bounced into the cardiac care unit, and I asked the question, hey, what's going on? Anything I can help with? It says, well, my patient needs a chaplain. Probably it's had a rough day, but I'm not going to bother you. And this nurse was not like, the spirit was not working in her. So I floated out, and about an hour and a half later, I got paged to the coronary care unit. And I come on the unit, and here is this grouchy nurse coming down the hall with tears in her eyes, saying, "Oh, you came. I said, "Yes, what's wrong?" She says, my patient. Well, there had been a code. This guy had coded. And she...
Which means...
Yeah, he's pretty seriously on his way out.
Yeah.
So then I hear her announce to the code team. Now keep in mind, there's a resident up on this guy's chest pumping him like this. She says, "The chaplain is here, the chaplain is here." And I actually looked over my shoulder because I was looking for him. And I realized, and there's everybody looking at me. And they're all, they got sweat on their brow. And they're in the middle of this thing. So they part. So I come in and I for a guy that doesn't like to pray with people right off the bat,
You're on.
So,
Sorry.
and I think the prayer that came out was for the patient and for the care he was getting. And I actually prayed for the energy and commitment of the resident pounding the chest and pushing the drugs and all this stuff. And I blessed him. And of course, while he's trying to save his life, I'm passing his spirit over to the other side, which was a little ironic. But we all knew that this was probably not going to work. So I back out, and they go back to earnest work, and he passes away. And I go back in with the nurse. There's nobody else there that hadn't. And I came back and met with the family. And after the family left, she's there, and it's about 10:30, so it's half an hour thing. And I said, well, how are you doing? And she says, well, I'm sad. He was such a nice person. He said, I've cared for him 3 nights running, and I never expected this to happen, but I knew he was going down here. And then she looked at me, she says, I don't think I was too polite to you earlier in the shift. And I said, that's okay. You were just wearing your heart on your sleeve, I said. And we had this conversation. And that's intimacy. You don't get those moments with many people in the course of a day, or much less a week or whatever, but they happen. And then if you try to compliment that person, and this is the other part of the story, I said, well, you've been doing great work. And she says, well, maybe, but I'm just doing my job, And I said, well, thank you for that. And so that the part of this that's probably most important in the hospital is that the staff are really the congregation. And the visitors and the patients are important, but they're actually guests. If you think about it, they just, and the staff stays behind, and they support each other and do all this stuff. And so some of the things that we do as chaplains, it's just kind of help them be present with themselves. And they're pretty good at supporting themselves without us, I gotta say. One of the, I think it's funny, but it's actually kind of wonderful. The chaplain's corps does ashes on Ash Wednesday. They cover the whole hospital complex, even the off-duty things, and they'll go around and they'll bless people and put ashes on them. And it's become a ritual. And even people who are not religious want the ashes because it's a matter of getting touched. And we often don't touch people in the way. And I thought it was peculiar because I've never been an ash person. But it's part of the connection. And if it were not to happen, the foundations would shake.
Okay, so they've...
Yeah.
This is the work we do.
This is the work we do. And
it's an unusual badge of honor, but that's where it's gone.
And I must say that the work of the culture of the organization, in my observation, and it's a little different in different. And I know you've done a lot of interesting things, kind of looking at the impact of stories in organizations. But I think that the stories that people tell about what's going on the unit is part of the transmission of that caring and that spirit and stuff. And while it's the communication people tend to, they try to capture some of these stories in the monthly, promotion things. And those are good, but they aren't the same as just kind of the... I have one more, actually.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to reflect a little on that Albany met. I mean, it's a culture that Harlan has developed there that has made the staff, the congregation, as opposed to the permanent, the resident congregation, as opposed to the transient?
He's nurtured it, and I like to give him some credit for it. But I think the one story I'll tell about Harlan is that when I first met him, he was our interim minister in First Reformed in Schenectady, and the summer,
Many years ago.
Many years ago. It's in the early '90s, and he had been the chaplain of a big mental health facility in California, and was looking for a little bit of a career move, and so became our interim as part of that process of reevaluating. And a good friend of ours had a daughter who came home from college with leukemia, not unlike my young police officer. And Harlan cared for them at Albany Med. He went back after our minister arrived, and he went back to California, but he stayed in touch with Jossie, the 19-year-old. And she had a bone marrow transplant at the Cleveland Clinic, and it didn't work. And Harlan was asked to come back and do the memorial service because he had really stayed in touch with us. He actually wrote it on my back porch. He flew in, and and there was a young kid from Scotia. This was full house at our church. A year and a half later, he's in New York, and somebody says there's a job as a chaplain up in Albany Med, and if you wanted to get close to your grandkids in Vermont, you ought to look at it. So he calls him up and says, and he comes up kind of on the spur of the moment, but he's on the East Coast and he lives on the West Coast, and so they have an interview for him. And here's this kind of scruffy guy from California, and they got the search committee. So they said, well, you live in California. Have you had any experiences around Albany Med? What brings your interest here? And he tells the story. And halfway through the story, these two nurses look at him and they point to him. They said, you did Jossie's memorial service. And the interview was over. He had the job. Just like that, because they recognized. And so the culture was there because the fact that you had some of the nurses from that hemonc unit at Jossie's memorial service, and she didn't die at Albany Med, but they knew about it and kept in touch. So there's a robust, caring culture that has been shaped by Harlan, perhaps, but it's a pretty rich piece of clay, I think. Like most healthcare organizations, they vary, but I find that it's not what you expect from a big teaching hospital when you're up on the units.
Yeah. Patient number 72.
Right. And I have a story that illustrates that surprised the heck out of me.
And we have, just a second, let me do the math, 12 minutes left.
Okay,
so.
we'll do this and talk about it. This is a story I call Zach and Jenny. And when you're chaplaining, you get paged. And it's about 9:30, which is after visiting hours. And I hear this. To me, all voices are young on the phone these days. This voice and male voice says, thanks for calling me back. I've got a patient, and she's in the process of passing away. And her family left early in the evening, and she's here all by herself, and she's been in a car accident, and and I said, now, where are you again? He says, well, I'm on the step down in the ICU unit up on the 3rd floor. I said, oh, yeah, okay. Well, why don't I just come up? So that'd be nice. So I go up, and there's this bearded young guy, about 30. And so we get to talking, and I said, well, what happened? Well, she was a librarian in Bennington, and she was going to work, and she had a car accident and, really has never done well. We thought she was doing well, and then she tanked. And day before yesterday, we thought things might go bad, so we smuggled her dog in. She got her dog in. We actually had the dog here for 3 hours. It was really kind of pleasant. I said, but her family decided not to stay. He says, no, the weather's closing in, and they just, sometimes it's just not the thing family wants to do. So it's just you and me. He says, yeah. He says, and I thought you ought to have a prayer. I said, well, can you tell me anything more? Well, she lives in New York. She doesn't live in Vermont. So I looked at him, and I began to pray for the love of puppies, for the nature of family that drives home in the winter storm, and the touch of nurses. And it was a pretty good prayer. I mean, I'm a chaplain. And just as I finished the prayer, I heard this beautiful tenor voice saying, it must have been Schumann's Liebestraum, but it was wow. And I looked over, and there's Zachary, and he is just holding the woman's hand, stroking her hair, and singing this classical love song to her. And I'm just dumbfounded. Well, that's easy for me, but I mean, and so when he's finished, I looked at him and says, "You've studied." He says, "Oh yeah, I graduated from Stony Brook with a major in the fine arts and voice." I said, "Wow, so have you performed?" He says, "Well, I performed, I was in the chorus at Carnegie Hall. I've been in the Lincoln Center. But, it's hard to make a living as a performer. And I wanted to get married, and we have 2 kids now, so I went to nursing school. And music may be my passion, but I found that nursing is really my love." I said, "Wow, you got a heck of a balance." And while he'd been singing, a couple of the other nurses had come in, and I said to them, I says, "Does he do this often?" She says, "Well, at least once a shift." I said, "At least once a shift?" And he looks at me and says, "Well, maybe, but it's not always when somebody's dying. I sing to my patients a lot. Sometimes I sing as kind of a funny song and whatever, and sometimes it's a sad song. But I sing a lot to my patients." I said, "Well, then my beeper goes off." So the beeper goes off, and I got something else to do, and I look over and I said, "Zach," I says, "this is not kind of your usual nursing experience." He says, "Good, that's what I wanted." I says, "Okay." So I leave the room, and I hear him start to sing Danny Boy. And I walked around the corner so he wouldn't see me kind of listening. And I was a little bit late picking up the page, but I had to hear him sing. And I was so enthused. I often have breakfast with Harlan after he's coming on, I'm going home. And I was so wound up about this. So Harlan says, "We ought to call a nursing supervisor. You ought to call his boss." I said, "Geez, that's a good idea." So I call her up, and she doesn't know me from Adam. I just said I was a chaplain. And I start to go on about Zach. And then it hit me. I said, "You've gotten these calls before." She says, "Oh yeah, about 3 a month." And I just smiled. And so invariably, if I'm on very early in my rounds, I go see if Zach's working and see how he's doing. And I said, "If you get the urge, let me know. I'll come back." But it's the most wonderful experience. And that whole, this is a unit that's full of sick patients.
Yeah.
And it's the sharing of a blessing, and it's part of the relationship, not only with the patients and the family, but this whole unit of caregivers. And he's not showcasing; he's just insightful in a way, and he could no more not sing probably than you and I could not breathe. It's that part of it. But so that's just one of the stories, or a couple of stories about the staff, and you can't even harvest all those stories, but they're weaving their way around in the organization, and it's the gluten that holds the healthcare pasta together. I think that's kind of where it goes.
Wow. Zach, the tenor on the 3rd floor.
Yep, the step down ICU. Yeah. I had one of the other, this is a little bit of a digression, but it is an ecumenical ministry. And if you have a patient who's Jewish and wants a rabbi, you can arrange that. Maybe not in the middle of the night, but you can set it up. Likewise with a Catholic priest. The Catholic priests tend to be a little bit more buoyant, and there are priests in the normal daytime rotation. And one of them, Father Greg, as I was coming in, he looked at me, he says, "Are you on tonight?" I says, "Yes, I am." He says, "Well, here's my advice. I'm going to commission you to do anything but consecrate a bishop. If you really need me, I'll come in. But you're on your own. So I just kind of
a temporary sheriff. What do they call that? You were you got a temporary cross, Catholic cross.
Well, it's kind of funny, but they've been very attentive, and every once in a while, you'll face a situation, a terrible accident, motorcycle accident. They hit a deer, and it was a Catholic family from over in Petersburg, and they wanted a priest. It was a terrible situation, and I called not Father Ken, but another priest. And so he arrived, and I said to him, "What are you going to do?" He says, I'm going to use water." And I said, "You're going to?" "Yes, I'm going to bless this patient." The patient was already dead. So he got a bowl of water, blessed it in front of the family.
Instead of the holy oil.
Holy oil. He didn't have any oil. And he took and just started to sprinkle. And told the story of Lazarus, Jesus in the cave, come out, Lazarus. And that was his blessing. And we were all, David was there, he's the priest. He's, being a priest. The rest of us were in tears of sorrow and joy at the same time. I mean, I don't know how he did it. And I was a little overcome, and he looks at me, he says, Doolittle, he says, let's say goodbye to the family. I'll buy you a cup of coffee. So it's been a very rich ecumenical experience for me because of the nature of the infrastructure.
Well, that's quite a little hobby sideline you got going there.
Well, it does. It provides a little pace to life, and it's never the same.
It's about once a month you do
Once a month, sometimes twice a month if somebody calls in sick or whatever, and it's been a gift, I think, really. And it's been a good place to harvest some stories. So.
All right. Well, you certainly have been a blessing to all those people.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Ellis says, God only gives you enough approval or feedback to keep you going.
That's right. I suppose they.
And so you never know what Timmy's family's telling about you.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
There are some continuing relationships. I think over the last 20 years, I think there have been 4 or 5 patients that I worked with who weren't church. Didn't have their own congregation.
Okay.
So after working with them, they'd call the chaplain's office and say, we had this chaplain. Some of them don't even remember my name, but we're having this memorial service at this funeral home or whatever. And I've done the memorial services, and the best story out of all that was a guy from Delmar who was. You don't have time for
No, we have 45 seconds.
Well,
I don't know that you can do a story in 45 seconds.
We're going to have to come back with that, but it involves an old man as a young kid talking to his friend across the street with an orange juice can and a string.
Okay, and on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us today at Story by Story, and we hope you'll come back again.
Thanks for listening.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,